Now, before I do the modification on this watch, I need to do a few little updates on this watch. I've had this a week now, almost exactly to the day, and there's some very interesting updates I should give you on this watch because it's surprised me in a few different ways. First of all, the few extra things I've noticed build quality wise, which are not great. Those are as follows. From new, I had to double check my original video when I unboxed this. I noticed there was an imperfection in the metalwork. Yes. That is not something I did. That was there from factory, brand new, not great. So that's not a good start, is it? But I don't want to send this back. I can't be bothered, to be honest with you. And I got this for £190 as opposed to nearly 300. So it was already discounted. But there was nowhere on the website saying it's discounted because it's been thrown together in a dirty factory. And when I say dirty, I'm looking at, there's at least 3 bits of fluff under the dial. I noticed under the crystals, there is a nice little speck. There's some specks just below the date indicator here, and there's another one over here somewhere. And that's what I can see just by looking a little bit harder. The other thing I've noticed is the hand alignment. It takes about 3 minutes beyond the marker for the hour hand to line up perfectly with the hour, so the hands don't line up perfectly. I'm not resetting them because one of the positives of this watch is the fact that the timekeeping is stunningly good. This has lost not even 8 seconds in a week. So that is extremely good. This is actually a little bit more accurate than my blooming Omega, which I spent a lot more money on. Luck of the draw, but the flip side of that is this has got quite a high beat error. So this is just literally luck of the draw with these movements. The other positive is obviously the lining up of the bezel insert, etc. But a negative, going back to negatives, is this bracelet is awful. And by awful, I mean, it sounds cheap, it feels cheap, it looks cheap. Clasp is very tinny and rattly and squeaky even. There's lots of play and bagginess between all the links. Good for comfort, but it just feels cheap. And then the end links, which are hollow, don't fit and conform very well to the case shape. So that is not a good start. That's a bit of a downside to mass-produced watches, but we know many companies that mass-produce watches and don't have as many flaws as I've just highlighted with this brand new watch. So that's the mini review out of the way. I think this is a bit of a chonky watch. By chonky, I mean it's chunky, and I want to show you something that is rather interesting. This is where watches can mess with your head. Look how tall this looks off my wrist. Look at the gaps under here. It looks like a chunky watch. I never see people do this. How far does this sit off the wrist? I'm using a ruler and just gently getting it to touch against my wrist. It's just under 15 millimeters, so it's 14 mil. I'm barely denting my skin. So visually, it's very tall and it sits comfortably off my wrist about 14 millimeters. Now I'm going to take this off and show you what the true measurement of this watch is in thickness. 13.2, 13.3. That is what this watch is literally measured at. This watch, my Omega, is on my wrist. Do the exact same thing of measuring with the ruler. Visually, to the metal, it's about 10 millimeters, 11 millimeters. Visually, it's close to 10 millimeters for how the watch sits on the wrist and how it looks on the wrist. That's just, and how it feels. That's simply what I'm showing you here. But then we go to the actual thickness of the watch, the height, including the crystal. It's thicker than this. It's significantly thicker by nearly 0.5 millimeter than the Seiko. Yeah, it wears better. So that is a mind-blowing difference between these watches. This is thicker than this watch, but this wears significantly slimmer on the wrist. So many things down to ergonomics, the design of the watch, how it will sit on your wrist. And that's what's inspired the modification of this, because I think it's a bit chunky visually on the wrist. So what I'm going to do is reduce that with some really cool parts to make this a bit of a skin diver. What is a skin diver? A skin diver is a watch which goes to shallow depths. You're not using breathing apparatus, you're using a snorkel. You're basically in your swim shorts and going for a breath hold dive. So you don't need a watch that has mind-blowing water resistance. This is not a dive watch. The watch that inspired this watch was. So the bits arrived, and like an excited child, I wanted to record this video straight away because this is something I've been really looking forward to doing and sharing with you guys. So these are all the bits from Namoki. I paid £117 including tax and delivery, and what I decided to get was, this was £4. This is a backup gasket to go with this thinner case back for this watch. Apparently you still keep the 100 meters water resistance. I really don't care. I'm going to go about as deep as a swimming pool. Clear AR thinner crystal to go with this thin knurled edge bezel, which is effectively to help reduce the thickness of the watch as well. Combined, I can't wait to see what's actually going to combine to make this watch be as thickness wise, but also the wearability, which I'll show you as well. I went for the 62 mass style flat bezel insert as well, because there's no raised loom pip. It's very smooth and flush. There's a slight dimple there. Go with the whole skin diver theme I'm going for. The most infamous of skin divers made by Seiko was the 62 mass. Lovely watch, but I like to sort of combine a bit of the contemporary with a nod to the past with this, and a knurled finish on here to give a bit of a classic look, and see how it all comes together. I'm very excited. Let's get on with it. First thing we need to do is take this bracelet off, and I'm using this bracelet removal tool to push from the drilled lugs to get these fatter spring bars out, and then we get it to release. Now before I take the case back off, I'm going to attempt to not scratch this watch and remove this bezel. I've seen a number of different ways people suggest to do it, and the way I've done it before when I did my Orient mod, if you haven't seen that video, check it out, is to use this tool. What I did was I've made this even thinner just by using a file and a sandpaper and things like that, just to make it sharper, so it's easier to get in underneath where there's a gap between the case and the bezel. Just enough to get some leverage to pop it, but then we don't want to scratch the case, so I'm going to get some tape. I would use masking tape, but I'm going to try this parcel tape because that's all I've got at the moment, to protect the watch, and I'm just going to stick this in and give it a pop. Now I've just got to try and squeeze this under here in this tiny gap, just enough to get some leverage to pop this bezel off. Now I'm in. I'm just gently going to lever this way. See, it's almost come, so I'm just going to do it again. With a bit of persuasion, it frees off, and that is it. Must retain this spring clip, and very minimal damage along this edge. This was actually quite stiff to get off. That's sometimes what happens. They can be a bit tricky, but at the end of the day, if you always try and remove the bezel at a point where it's not going to be glaringly obvious to you and it's away from your line of sight, here's a good place to do it because it's hidden away. When you put the new bezel back in, it'll hide most of it. You put a bracelet or strap back on, it's going to hide it again. So it really doesn't matter. So what we're going to do now is we're going to get this crystal out, but that means taking the movement, etc., outside of the watch. So we're going to unscrew the case back. The way that works is, what we need is this case back removal tool. These screw and adjust to line up with these notches in the case back. Don't want to risk scratching this case back, which is all lovely and polished. So what I do is I use just a bit of a plastic bag, acts as a bit of a protection between me and slipping. I hold nice and tight, give it a twist, and that unscrewed really easily. That unscrews. Now what we're going to do is we need to get this crown out. As you can see here, there's a little tiny dimple in that lever. When I press there and pull this crown at the same time, it should just come straight out like it does this. And this can come out all together now. Now that's gripped in there with this movement holder. So the way I need to encourage it out is actually to find where there's a little indentation where it can flex a bit. So I find here is good, but it's a bit risky because it's near some moving parts here. So I find another place where I can get this out is here, because it's not too vulnerable here, because there's nothing too delicate to break, and it's just popped it. Place this here ready, a cushion to rest it on, and that comes out nice and tidy. So I'll keep that aside. Now it's time to get this crystal out. The way you do that is use a press to remove it, and it's the same thing I'm going to use to push in the new one. So what I do to work out the size of that is I get my selection of presses here, and I get one that's going to fit in there, like that one. I'll put it in my press and screw it in, dropping everything. Screw that into there. And I've got this bottom piece here which lines up and fits with the size of the watch, and I literally just give it a push. Now to get this to reach and have enough of distance to push in and press the crystal out, I've had to pack this up an extra bit of height. So now it should be a case where I place this face down. There's enough room in here just to show you. This is resting on the metal. So there's somewhere for the crystal to go when it gets pushed out. And this is just to push it up. So now I should just press and it pops straight out. And there we are. It's popped out nice. Anyway, what we're going to do is make sure everything lines up in here okay. I'll see how this lines up, this thing. Yeah, see there's a little tab here. It lines up with a little notch in there. So I've got to make sure that's engaged. I'm using the original crystal gasket, which is fine. Before I do that, I'm just going to make sure it's all clean. Give it a puff. I'm going to wipe it. This is a very new watch, it should be okay. Now line this back up in here using that little notch. See in there where it would line up. You can See, the notch of this inner chapter ring is in place. Now I'm going to get this crystal out. As you can see, I'm wearing gloves. I'm just checking this is identical both sides. It's got no chamfer. It's got clear AR. I can't tell which side it has it. It doesn't actually say. There's no sticker or anything. Maybe it has it both sides, I don't know. So the underside of the crystal is nice and clean. So you can see the importance of wearing gloves when doing these kind of jobs. So I'm lining the crystal up, pushing it in just to get it started by hand. So press is set up. I need to place the watch in here. Got the right adapters to fit with the size of the crystal, the top, and then to hold the watch in place at the bottom. And what I need to do is simply make sure the watch is level. I'm gently pressing and rotating. Gently pressing and rotating so I don't over press and crack the crystal, and checking it is level, checking that it's flat in the case. It all looks good to me. Now it's time to put the watch back together. Before I put the movement back in, I need to do some cleaning, and the cleaning bit is time consuming and well worth the effort, because if you notice something that you haven't cleaned after you put the watch back together, that is 10 times more annoying. So we're going to get the watch here, and I'm going to show you close up. You can't really pick it out here, but there's some tiny dots. They're very, very subtle. So all I've got to do to get rid of them is, first of all, try with the puffer. So I'm just going to inspect that really close. I can't see anything else on there now. It seems like the puffer's got rid of those few little bits that are on the dial. Then I'm going to do the same on the inside of the watch here, just to double check there's any bits that have easily just got in there are gone. There's no smudges. Just checking under the light. All looks really clear. So when I feel happy that everything's dust free, I literally place this over, one final puff, over the watch. Right where it needs to go. I won't fully engage it, turn it over. I'm just going to line up where the crown goes and just gently push this in the watch. So I know it's not fully pushed in because you can see in there's a gap, so you've got to make sure before you start screwing the back down that everything is fully pushed back down. And if you're not 100% happy, I can always take it back out and re-puff it. Here's old versus new. As you can see, it's a good millimetre thinner at least, because you haven't got the glass in there, which adds thickness. This is greasing pad. I use this for my gaskets when I change anything on a watch. So you place it in there. This is made of silicone generally, is what is in here, and you give it just a light greasing, and that is ready to put around this case back here. I changed my mind. I took the gasket that was on the back of this and transferred it, as it's almost a brand new watch, onto this new case back, because this one that I bought from Namoki, for some reason, even though they recommended it, it's not the right size. It's not flat, whereas this one is flat. And it's a little bit too big, so it's only £4 down the drain, which is okay by me. So I'm now just going to place the case back there, get it started by hand, then use my case back tool, which I used before, to get it going again. I feel like that nips in nicely. Let's get the crown back in. Give it a wiggle as you push it back in. So it engages perfectly. All feels good. Case back screws in beautifully flush. Now before I measure the thickness of this watch, I need to put this new bezel in. So let's get this set up. And the way you do that is I need to just get this out of the packaging and get the crystal press ready again. So crystal press is set up. I need to get this back in as it was. So remembering to get these little metal bits that stick down to line up with the little holes in there. That's what keeps it in place. I'm going to then loosely line up the bezel in place till I feel it's going to engage. And the good news is this bezel already has a gasket installed, so all I've got to do is get the right adapter for the press to line up with the inside of this bezel. So it just pushes the bezel and nothing else. And I barely pressed that and it popped in place. I literally just leant on it. Now let's see what the bezel action's like. Oh, lovely. It's much better than the standard one. Really good. So we're almost there, guys. I'm not going to measure the thickness of this watch or try it on until the very, very end. So got to put the bezel insert in, which is already by Namoki. Kindly had the sticker installed on it. No, it hasn't. Oh, darn it. Easiest thing to do is to leave this middle part in place. Use some tweezers to pick off the backing paper. So I peeled off the backing paper. Now I need to get this bezel insert to simply line up and stick on there. So I'm going to place this upside down and then line this up, stick it to the bezel insert. Now when I peel the rest of this off, it should be ready to stick down. As you can see, when you pick off this tissue backing paper, the tape is applied neatly to this bezel insert, which is nice and flat. Now I've got the tricky part of lining this up, so I'm going to have to be careful and be quiet now. So what I do is I'm going to line up the 12 o'clock pip with obviously the chapter ring and the 12 o'clock marker. Get this lined up and then just press it down. Gently press. There we are. What a nice, prettier bezel. A lot less bulkier than the standard one. Look at the difference in height. Same with this case back. So much less bulk. Now let's see how this lines up. Oh, that's beautiful. And it's got a loomed bezel pip. So let's check that out, because the standard bezel insert and this one just doesn't have a loom pip, which is pointless. So let's see how that looks. As usual, Seiko loom is fantastic. And we've got a lovely matching pip in the 12 o'clock that's actually functionable and usable. Very pretty. I'm just going to have a go with this, the rotation feel again. Oh, so nice. It's got a lovely feel to it. Same 120 clicks. This is a moment of truth. That's the whole point of doing this mod. Remember before it was 13.3, 13.4 in height. In total, the new height, Bob's your uncle, fun is your aunt, is only 12.6. So that is not far off a millimetre saved in height. And that is not the whole picture. The whole picture is going to be, when this is back on a strap, how's this going to wear? While I wait for my Tropic waffle strap to arrive for this watch, which is integrated lugs, to go with the whole 62 mass look, I'll show you pictures. Follow the channel and you'll see some updates when I do some shots on the community tab. Let's see what this looks like on wrist with this lovely Artem strap I've been sent. This is separate review will come for this, but this is something I wanted to match with this, to go with the contrast with the sand and the black. It's a sailcloth style strap, so it can be worn in the water, so this is still a sporty watch. Let's see how this wears. I've been able to go up a whole extra notch in wearability, because before I had to go on there. It just wouldn't move to the next one because of how much thicker it felt on the wrist. Look how much slimmer this looks on the wrist. Oh my goodness. It's a significant difference. It hasn't got that extra deep case back, even though it's only a millimetre saving overall. It's where it's saved. A little bit in height here. Case back brings the watch closer to your wrist. Now let's see the difference it makes with this whole measure test here. Remember before, now top of the crystal, top of the watch, it's just over 10 mil. It's just before, the way the watch sat on my wrist, it was definitely approaching 13, 14 millimeters. This is about maybe 10 or 11 millimeters off the wrist. So you see the top of the watch. That is the trick. That's why the calipers sometimes don't always tell the whole story. Sometimes it's literally just doing these weird, clever little tricks. Namoki have been so clever at doing this little change that it makes this difference to the wearability of this watch. What do you guys think? I can't wait to put this on the other waffle strap when it comes. I'm very pleased how this came out. It wasn't easy, but I've hopefully been thorough enough. But check out some of my other mod videos. You can see all the other things I've done. This is my first Seiko. Hybrid blend of SKX 62 mass elements, sports watch, all in around £300, including parts. If you've got the tools already and you like modding, you're going to do it again. It's not a bad hobby to have, not too expensive, but happy days. Thanks so much for watching, guys. This has not been an easy one. I've been a bit rusty with the mods lately, so you can still do it. Just give it a go, have fun, and hopefully my videos helped you. Bye for now.